We're going to call on the following speakers in this order. I'll say a few words, then Congressman Rob Bishop, Congressman Jim Hansen, State Representative Ken Ivory, and Roger Barras, State Representative, both of whom have done stellar work up here on Capitol Hill. And then we'll call on a number of others as well. I'm going to call on John Swallow's going to say a few words. Then I've got Don Pay, and we want Don as one of the representatives of all the hunters and the exotic animal people in this state and all of the people who really love our out of doors. We want him to say a few words if he can. Now, I'm grateful to have the friendship of Congressman Bishop and Congressman Hansen, both of whom have played very significant roles back there in trying to get people to understand what we in Utah go through, caused by the federal government. And we're lucky to have them both working with us. State Representative Ken Ivory, I want to thank you for your dedication to holding the federal government accountable to longstanding commitments that were made to our state about public land ownership over a century ago. State Representative Roger Barras is the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee here in Utah. No one knows more about the importance of the issues that we are here to discuss than you, Roger, and we appreciate that. John Swallow, of course, Assistant Attorney General of the United States, Deputy Attorney General. We're really happy to have him, and we're going to call on some others as well. Now, the question of who owns the public land is not a new one in our state of Utah. This debate is over 100 years old. I believe we are in a climate where if we do it right, the lands in our state can finally be brought under control of our state. My good friend Governor Norm Bangerter wanted to be here with us today, but he is out of town and couldn't make it. This is an issue that he knows very well. And when we talked to him yesterday, he was supportive of what we are doing and told me that he believes, quote, "This is a good thing to do, and now is a good time to do it," unquote. With over 63% of our lands owned by the federal government, we know firsthand what it means to have limited access to and control over our natural resources and roads. But it's more than just a question of access and control. The lands that are federally controlled do not produce any state taxes, which is detrimental to our public education system, which of course is funded by property taxes throughout the state in large measure. Most of the lands involved in this debate could be revenue productive in the best interest of our children's educational advancement. Now, we are joined today by leaders in business, in the business community, who are dedicated to improving public education in Utah. And I want to thank them all for being here, and I want to thank you all for your support. The passage of Representative Ivory's bill and also of Roger Barras's bill. This, in my way of thinking, is a very important step. I commend both of these representatives for their energy and tenacity in the face of a very difficult and complicated issue. And I'm sure that each of these representatives will want to chat with you more about the commitments that were made to our state in the Enabling Act when they give their remarks. As we roll out Utah's public lands policy, it will be crucial that the members of the federal delegation work closely with the state and local stockholders to make sure that we get this right. I'm a strong believer in federalism, and this is a perfect example of how it should work. As federal legislators, we need to be taking our directions from the people here in Utah, and especially listening to our state representatives. I believe that Utah land managers should have more authority than the BLM when it comes to managing the land within our borders. The states in the eastern part of this country don't have nearly the amount of federal ownership that we have, and they are doing a fine job at it. We believe it is time that we are put on an equal footing with them when it comes to control of our own land and, of course, the resources on the land. Now that the state legislature has passed a bill, or bills, I should say, it's time for the members of the federal delegation to start working with them on the message that we will take back not only to Washington, but all over the country. The Lieutenant Governor's office, we're grateful that he is here, and he's going to speak to us here for a few minutes today. But that office has already started scheduling meetings to discuss the process that we'll be following on these matters. And I'm sure these leaders will tell you more about that process. This process will benefit from the state's synergy and collective strength that produced the recently passed bills in our state legislature. Now, our county leaders, many of whom are here today, are committed to better land management policies, and in recent years, they have been working very hard on ways to gain more control over our own lands. And I only wish that Congress could pass bills with the same kind of supermajorities that you folks got for the bills here. HB 148, I'll just talk about that, takes immediate effect upon the signature of Governor Herbert, so time is of the essence. Back in the early days of my service in the United States Senate, I was the leader of the Sagebrush Rebellion, or one of the leaders of it. That started during my first term in the Senate. The state has made it very clear that they expect the land to be conveyed by the end of 2014. I want to see that transfer of land happen. And the end of course, the need for any further sagebrush rebellion during my last term in the Senate. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do that. Now, we want guaranteed access to the lands and using state and county roads and other RS 2477 roads. Those roads are vital to our Western way of life. And yet every day we're in some sort of conflict with federal overlords that know that those were RS 2477 roads and yet won't let us use them. They're interfering with our Western way of life. The illegal closure of these roads by our federal counterparts is a constant source of deep contention that none of us want, and state ownership of the lands will mean that the state will also own the roads. Now, our state has vast amounts of untapped energy. When we own the land, then no longer would we have to put up with federal bureaucrats and their lack of decision-making with regard to reasonable development of our lands. Right here is a piece of Utah oil shale. We know that we can produce oil from oil shale and do it at commercial rates when you consider how much oil is really costing today. And frankly, that's not about to go down. We're sitting on among Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming, up to 1.6 trillion barrels of recoverable oil. Probably 3 trillion barrels of oil, but at least 1.6 trillion that should be recoverable. It's something that needs to be done. We can't get the permits to do the things that we should do. I saw the president the other day saying that there's more oil being developed now in his administration than ever before. The fact of the matter is, the reason that we've come up in oil production in this country recently is because of the Bakken claim up there in North Dakota, and of course the huge claim that they've just found down in southern Texas on private land. So there was no federal intrusion or federal lack of support for the development. I think North Dakota has less than a 3% unemployment rate. In other words, they have full employment. They can't even find people to do all the jobs that are high-paid jobs that they have as a result of finding that oil on private land. Well, a lot of ours is on public land, and we can help save this country if we can just get the federal government off our backs. And I also believe that we would be better stewards and better managers than the federal government would be. We love our lands. We live on our lands. We work on our lands. We have leisure on our lands. And we produce on our lands. And we love Utah. And there's no use kidding. These are some of the things that drive some of us really wild back there, because we just are mistreated all the time by the almighty federal government and the overlords that we have in this particular, in the West and in this particular state. So at this time we'll call on Rob Bishop and then Jim Hansen. Then we're going to call on I think, can I let you wrap up?
Sure.
Okay. Then we'll call on Ken Ivory and Roger Barris, and in that order, and then we'll go from there, okay? Rob?
Thank you. Senator, I appreciate it. Obviously, both Senator Hatch and Jim Hansen are no Johnny-come-lately to this particular issue. They've been fighting it for quite a long time. Wayne, can you bring me those 3 charts up here? The first one I want to show is simply the stuff that is in red, that's the state of Utah. That's all the private property that we have. Everything else is controlled by the federal government. Problem is, the federal government really doesn't care that they control all that much. What's the next one? What you didn't see.
How are we doing, Rob?
Vanna, you're wonderful. Everything that is red is federal property in the United States. Most people, when they look at this, simply go, wow, I had no idea. 1 out of every 3 acres, a third of this country, is owned by the federal government. Why? I'm not quite sure, but they do. 1 out of every 2 acres in the West is owned by the federal government. The only problem is, if you talk to people in the East, they look at that and they go, gee, I had no idea, and then they go, so? And that's the next step that we have to do. That's the concept we have to deal with in here. You know, in the late 1980s, the Berlin Wall came down and communism fell. And the idea of heavy-handed, centralized state planning was discredited in the entire nation, in the entire world, everywhere except the bureaucracies in Washington, D.C., where within the Department of Interior and the Department of Agriculture Forest Service, they still believe in centralized policies coming out from Washington everywhere else. I don't know what it takes for them to shave in the morning and look in the mirror and realize that they are intellectual dinosaurs, but they are. And somehow we've got to get that message through of what it means to us, which I hope is the next. Which if you look at where the red is, then you also look at the map. The red states are those that have the hardest time funding their education system. It's almost a 2-to-1 relationship. It is not a coincidence that those maps are together. It is simply the fact that we are hurting our kids in the West. Let's put the real one back up there. By our refusal to simply use the resources we have. And there is nothing in this world to indicate that only somebody in Washington is smart enough and good enough to control these lands and to come up with the standards. There is nothing inherently bad with Utahns. Look, the first national park was created at Yellowstone when Wyoming was a territory. That's significant. And then, of course, Congress didn't fund it for the next 6 years. But the second national park was created in Michigan, and then given back to Michigan because they could be better stewards of that park, and they are today. There is nothing inherently wrong with Utahns charting the course of their policy. And that's why I am so proud of the state legislature and the administration this year. You have started a course that changes the discussion. We're not just talking about our sovereign rights anymore. We're talking about what this does to our kids and how that has to change. And we're also going back east and reminding Easterners that they basically pay $9 billion a year out of their pocket to control the West. What are they buying from that except harm to my kids? And that's the new message. What the state legislators will now be doing is going forward in the next few months with their committees coming up with a matrix of what the state would do when they have control over these lands again. Not every acre is going to be strip mined. Some of this acreage needs to be protected, and the state is just as good as Washington in being able to protect lands. Some of this acreage has to be open for multiple use and especially for recreation purposes. And I hate to say this, out of Washington are now coming regulations that put restrictions on who can recreate on these public lands. It is so bad that they've also come up with a restriction for outdoor guides of what kind of coffee can be served on federal lands. I'm sorry, there are some things that no level of government should decide. What kind of coffee to drink and what kind of light bulbs to have are 2 of those. Our access for hunting and fishing and other types of recreation needs to be guaranteed. It's not being guaranteed by this administration in Washington. It will be by the state of Utah, as well as then which lands are developable so that we can get property tax from them. We can also get good paying jobs for income tax, all of which goes to education, and we can also get royalty taxes and severance taxes coming in the state of Utah. That's where the future is, to shrink this white so the state of Utah does do what the state of Utah can do best, control its own destiny, is our goal. And I am so proud the legislature is moving forward, and I think changing the rhetoric, changing a paradigm of how we're talking about these issues, and I'm very proud that we in Washington, who have the wonderful job of going back there on a regular basis, will do everything we can to assist and back up the state of Utah in this particular effort. If it involves legislation, and we do have legislation, we will do that. If it involves any other kind of support, we will do that. We will make sure that we have a united front in making sure that this situation changes. And people finally respect the fact that Utahns are competent and capable of managing their own career. Jim, you're the godfather of this effort.
Thank you, Rob. You know, many years ago, I was Speaker of the House in this particular area, and we passed something called the Sagebrush Resolution. Went over almost unanimously. Shortly after that, the governor of California came up. His name was Ronald Reagan. You may have heard of him. He came up and we stood in the Salt Palace, all of us together. Remember that, Orrin? I do. And he got up and he said, "I'm a sagebrush rebel." And we all got up and cheered. We weren't the only state to do that, you know. They're all of the 11 western states, all but California. I hardly consider them part of the West. But anyway, all but California passed the resolution to do that. And then when he became president of the United States, I had the opportunity of being down in his office with another congressman from Oregon, Denny Smith. And he was sitting there with the Secretary of Interior, Jim Watt, the Secretary of Agriculture, John Block. And he made this statement to him, and he said, "You know," he said, "I'm sick of the way you people treat folks in the West." He said, "You guys go out and they have the hat, they have the green pickup, they have a gun and they have a badge, and they say, 'By hell, you're going to do it our way and we'll throw you in jail.'" And he said, "That's not the way we're going to do it anymore." He said, "I want the word to go out now to all of you people, that all of your people, right down to the last guy, if he's on some podunk little ranch somewhere and the rancher happened to step on some ground," he says, "let's work this out." He said, "Our way we're going to do it now is come, let us reason together." He said, "I want you to go to church with them. I want you to go to the Chamber of Commerce with them. I want you to be part of it." You know what happened out of that? The Sagebrush Rebellion really died, because Ronald Reagan was so kind, so nice, so understanding that the people said, "Why do we have to do this anymore?" That was both a blessing and a curse to us. In a way, it was a blessing because we didn't have these knotheads bothering us for 8 years. And it was a curse because we didn't get a few things solved that we should have done. We were in the legislature many years ago. Those of us who were there, we talked about how do we possibly pull this off. We talked to our federal people. We talked to everybody. We couldn't see a way to do it, really. We were very frustrated. My 22 years in Congress, I served on the Interior Committee, which later became the Resource Committee, and I later became chairman of that committee. Every year we got into this issue. We went through so many hoops you can't believe them on what it would take. But you know, the stars didn't line up. They didn't line up. Did you notice last night that Venus and Jupiter were a straight line together? We're looking for the straight line. And if I've ever seen a time that the stars would line up, it's coming now. And I look at it this way. Let me be very political. I think there's an awfully good chance that the United States of America will elect a Republican president who can see the value of what goes on in the West and all these things that Rob was talking about. I think there's an excellent chance that the United States Senate will go Republican. I think there's an excellent chance that the House will stay where it was. And then with having Rob as chairman of this subcommittee, or hopefully chairman of the whole committee, and Orrin in his power of position that he has and has kept for a long time, and for 22 years I've badgered Orrin and he's badgered me about things on land, about things on military, about other things, but together, after we kicked each other around a lot, I think we got an awful lot done. And it was a pleasure and a great privilege for me to work with Orrin Hatch. Anyway, be that as it may, I think the stars are lining up again. And that happens so seldom. I remember during the Reagan years, we didn't have enough Republicans to pull it off. We did, don't get me wrong, I don't mean to be that partisan. We had some really good Democrats that were helping us also. And then we didn't get it under the Clinton administration. In fact, he kicked us around. We didn't, George won, Bush won, 41, we couldn't get it together. Bush 2, I went down to the White House and stood in the Oval Office with George W. Bush, and he said, "I think this is a wonderful idea, get it done." But you got to have the stars line up to make that happen. If ever there's an opportunity for that to happen, I can see it coming. I can feel it coming. I think it's going to come, and this will be the chance that the delegation, plus this great work that a representative has done both of them here, and the great work that the governor's done. I've read your stuff. It's excellent. Somebody did a whale of a lot of work for people like Roger Barris and Representative Ivory to put this thing together. The support that they can have and the support that I think they will generate from other states. Every time we brought it up, we got support from other states. Idaho used to call, Montana used to call, Wyoming used to be there, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, all of them were there. You can get a head of steam going now. So while we've got this golden opportunity, don't let it fall through the cracks. I think it's important that this thing gets off the ground. I think it's important a bill gets introduced. Let me tell you, having served on about every level of government there is, the slowest, hardest place to get anything done is United States Congress. It takes forever. And you just push and pull and do everything you can to get it to that stage. And so I think somewhere we've got to get it going. And then on the side, the state's helping, the governor helping. I think we can do this. I compliment Orrin and Rob for being willing to carry this on their shoulders. A lot of us will be there to help them. To my way, my friends, this will be a great thing for the state of Utah. Well, I had some people grab me not too long ago and say, we don't want it to belong to the state of Utah. It belongs to all of us. Well, guess what? At one time, the whole shooting match belonged to all of us. But under their enabling legislations, all those other states, they got theirs, and they took it. Now it's our turn. And when they say that it belongs to all of us, fine. They can come out and they can recreate. And we come out and spend all the money they want to spend. That's fine with me. On the other side of the coin, it comes down to the idea, this is Utah's time, and I think it will be followed up by many, many other states. So I thank our representatives here who have done such a good job. I thank Orrin and Rob for doing such a wonderful job.
Well, thank you, Jim and Rob. I'd like to call on our Lieutenant Governor now and have him speak, and then our Deputy Attorney General have them speak. And then we're holding off the two state legislators till the end because that's the cream of this whole thing, and we want them to be able to tell you what they think about all this. Thank you, Jim and Rob.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. I'm a man slow to boil, but as I have been exposed more and more to the inner workings of this issue, and as chair of the Constitutional Defense Council, which deals with issues of public lands, particularly what's come to fore has been our right of access to the streams, the mountains, the valleys, the lakes of our land here in Utah. And we found that the federal government is asserting that thousands and thousands, literally, of those roads will no longer be passable, no longer be usable, no longer be open for access by the citizens of this state and of the United States, but it will be closed off only to those who pass some test to be there at a certain time. Since the settlement of these valleys in 1847 by Europeans, we have made our living from the streams and lakes and mountains and valleys of this beautiful country. We've come to love it and appreciate it. We have been good stewards of this land. But now those, in many ways, are being closed off to us. And a process at a time, whether it be mining in the Arizona Strip, or whether it be logging in certain areas, or whether it be milling lumber, or you name the process, again and again and again, we find ourselves foreclosed from using legitimate opportunities to develop an economy that almost every other state in the United States has. When I heard of the federal government's position on some pioneer roads where you can seize the wagon ruts, saying, well, you use something to the side of that, and therefore you've abandoned that, well, then we want this one. No, we're not going to let you use that one for another legal reason. It just really defies reason. You realize that there's somebody dealing in bad faith. We're here not to pound our chests. We're here not just to thump our chests and say we're big and mean and bad and mad. We're here to say that we will, as the governor always says, we will negotiate, we will legislate, and we will litigate. We filed notice of claim on over 12,000 roads. That is our intent as the state of Utah, John will probably address this somewhat, to sue to vindicate the state's right, the citizens' rights, to have access to the mountains, streams, and lakes of Utah, so that we can, consistent with good land planning, with good land management, use what is rightfully ours and what Delaware and Florida and Michigan, as you've heard, and other states enjoy. And that's what this is about. We're looking for a conversation, as Congressman Hansen said. We want someone in the federal government at the highest level to take seriously the statement by the state of Utah. We know we have some treasures in the state of Utah. We understand the beauty of Zion and Bryce, et cetera, et cetera. We're not about to rape and pillage. We want to preserve those wonderful, wonderful areas. And we want to preserve many, many beautiful wilderness areas as they are in their pristine condition. But there are also many parts of our public lands which legitimately, by almost any agreement of reasonable people, should be developed in responsible ways. We're blessed with rich resources here. Governor Herbert is particularly devoted to this issue, and it affects rural Utah, rural America disproportionately. We've watched our population weight move to the Wasatch Front. 10% of our population and the whole state's economy rely heavily upon resource industries. And we need to restate the purpose and validate the mission that those purposes have. It's just not right, and we're not going to live with it any longer because we think, see our way because of the efforts of these fine gentlemen. We see our way clear to changing it.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Bell, and thank you, Senator Hatch, Congressman Hansen, and Congressman Bishop, and those others who are here today. My name is John Swallow. I'm Chief Deputy Attorney General, and on behalf of the Attorney General, I just want to pledge the support of our office to this initiative. We've worked many months together on putting together a plan through these great legislators and their leadership and vision to change things. Because we realize as we're facing $5 a gallon gas, as we realize that petroleum is the biggest import into this country from overseas, we realize that we cannot stand by any longer and not develop the natural resources that we've been blessed with as a state. The Attorney General's office doesn't pass the policy of the state. We simply enforce it. We're the muscle. We're the ones who have the access to the courts to enforce the policy set by our legislature, and we want these legislators to know that we firmly stand behind the policies that they are enacting here relative to our public lands and access. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to sit in a committee meeting and testify on House Bill 148 and also the resolution passed by Representative Barris. And I made reference to what's been referred to already today about the Berlin Wall. In all respect to President Ronald Reagan, as he challenged Gorbachev to tear down the wall, this government of ours has, in essence, built up metaphorical barriers to surround and prevent Utah from accessing the natural resources that we have to access. And in all due respect, I believe it's time for the Secretary of the Interior and this President to tear down the metaphorical walls that they have placed around our natural resources so that we can develop our resources, we can create the jobs that have been talked about today, and we can fund education, which we cannot do fairly without access to our resources. So on behalf of the Attorney General's office, I want you to know that we stand firmly behind these policies, ready to litigate, ready to enforce the benefit of the bargain that Utah should have received when the Enabling Act was passed by Congress in 1894 and when we became a state in 1896. So thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for these policies, and we just stand firmly behind you and certainly are part of the response that we're going to have as a state to reclaim the access to our lands and the ownership and title to our lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, Congressman Hansen, Deputy Attorney General Swallow. It's really fascinating to stand on the shoulders of giants, as Sir Isaac Newton said, and that's exactly what we do. There are giants who have gone before, who have done amazing things in plowing the road before in what we're doing. But this is the beginning of what Team Utah looks like. And so I want you to have a good look. There are others who would be here. Scheduling conflicts did not allow them to do that, but this is what Team Utah looks like. Now, if I could, let me get this up here. It had been mentioned before, thank you. How's that to have a congressman as your Vanna White? You know, that works out all right.
Doesn't have the shape.
I got the hair.
But taking a good look at this, I mean, we've got our PTA and others in our education community here. I used to be a teacher. My wife is a teacher. We have a $2 billion per pupil funding gap. That's what it takes to get to average. We're $2 billion below the national average. Some have said, well, let's cut the personal exemption. Well, that would raise about $380 million. We're still $1.9 billion away from average. Well, let's more than double the income tax. Never mind that that will cripple the economy in this state, because Illinois tried that. Illinois raised taxes 66%, and businesses and families fled the state. But assuming that that wouldn't happen, if we more than doubled the income tax, we could get to $2 billion, assuming no adverse economic consequence. Now, that still leaves us $5 billion short, because nearly $5 billion of our state budget comes from a federal government that everyone admits is fiscally unsustainable. These are big issues. These are big issues. Now, we're reminded of what Ronald Reagan, he's been brought up before today, we're reminded of what he said. This is a wonderful time to be alive. We're lucky not to live in pale and timid times. We've been blessed with the opportunity to stand for something. Now, here's how crazy it gets, though. When you look at this map, North Dakota and Utah came into the Union at about the same time, 6 years apart. The terms of their Enabling Act, the terms of their statehood, the promise that the federal government made to dispose of the public lands, word for word identical. Word for word identical. And yet North Dakota today, as you heard, North Dakota, the federal government controls 3% of the land in North Dakota and 65% of the land in the state of Utah. North Dakota just added $1.2 billion into classrooms and roads, school infrastructures. They added an additional $3,700 per pupil in per pupil funding. So for Utah to catch up on a per pupil funding basis, it would take more than $4 billion. To catch up with our neighboring states, the promises are the same, only the performance is different. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? The promises are the same, only the performance is different. So I commend all of the people that have worked so hard on this. We've got folks from our county, Mark Ward, Association of Counties, Brent Gardner. We've got the Attorney General's office, our Governor's office, our congressional delegation, Mike Swenson from USA All, so many people, Kathleen Clark with the Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, our PTA and our education community. This is what Team Utah begins to look like. Now is the time where we honor the process and move forward in a very methodical manner. We've set a deadline because we can't wait any longer. We simply can't wait any longer for our children to be $2 billion below average in per pupil funding. We can't wait any longer with $5 billion of our $13 billion budget at risk from a fiscally unsustainable federal government. We can't wait any longer. So now is the time. This is what Team Utah looks like, and as we move forward, we've set the deadline. Now we work through the Constitutional Defense Council to begin working the process, measuring twice, cutting once. As was mentioned before, national parks off the table. 33 congressionally designated wilderness areas off the table. The national monuments that are managed by the National Park Service off the table, because that's our heritage. That's who we are in Utah. We value these open lands and open spaces, but certainly we're able to manage this multiple use for a sustained yield of the natural resources, so we do have the same advantages in education. We do have the same advantages in business. We do have the same advantages in preparing for the long-term viability and sustainability of our state, because Utah will show the nation and be the model to the nation of what it means to be self-reliant and free. Thank you so much, and we look forward to your support, because this is, Team Utah is not just up here. Team Utah is our PTA, and it is the UEA, and it is the Education Association, and it is USA All, and it is the counties. This is Team Utah. Now also we're joined, Arizona just passed this legislation through their Senate last week. We have legislators in other states working on this as well. So this is our time, as was mentioned before, and now is the time to show the nation what it means to be self-reliant and free. Thank you very much.
I think, it being the concluding speaker, the best thing I can do is keep it short. I would just agree with everything that's been said today. And Representative Ivory said it so well, that those of us who have initiated this process at this point in time in the state of Utah stand on the shoulders of others who have been working on this for years and years and years, both within our state and from our federal delegation. I think, though, it's appropriate, there's some words that just ring true to me, and they are words that were said by President Andrew Jackson clear back in 1833, at a time when the federal government understood its duty to extinguish title to federal lands, and either to sell them, to grant them to states, to grant them through the Homestead Act or other opportunities to actually extinguish its title. And I want to leave these words with you from President Andrew Jackson. He says, "I do not doubt that it is the real interest of each and all of the states of the Union, and particularly the new states, that the price of these lands shall be reduced and graduated, and that after they have been offered for a certain number of years, the refuse remaining unsold shall be abandoned to the states, and the machinery of our land system entirely withdrawn. It cannot be supposed the compacts intended that the United States should retain forever title to lands within the states." And that's where we are today. We are, since statehood, 116 years of government entanglements, of the burden of regulation from the federal government on these lands to the point has been described and been stated already today, that is becoming unbearable and almost impossible to access these lands for their intended purpose. And that's the reason that we are taking up the flag, taking up the charge. The time is ripe. And we do appreciate, as Representative Ivory said, Team Utah, which you see here, which is going to go through a process of determining with our state delegation and our federal delegation on the approach that we are going to take, the sovereign actions that we will take, the discourse and dialogue that we will have with our federal government in transferring ownership and title and management responsibilities of these lands to the state of Utah. We don't want the federal government just to go out and sell that. Time's passed for too long for that to happen. We want that to be transferred to the state of Utah. We love our lands. We will be good stewards of those lands and make them available, open, and accessible, and much more productive to all of the citizens, not only of the state of Utah, but of the world. And thank you very much for coming today.
Well, thank you. You've had some excellent people speaking, but we have two more that we're going to call on. One is Don Pay, who heads the sportsmen in this state. They've done an awful lot to repopulate our state with exotic animals, and they believe in the environment. They believe in as do we all. They believe in the beauty of Utah. They believe in the freedom that we have in Utah, and of course, all of the things that come from being free. So we'll call on Don first, and then we got Mike Swenson here. He'll be the last one, and then we'll be glad to take any questions. Mike, of course, he'll tell you who he represents, the off-the-road vehicle people, the people who really want to use these roads that have always been used in the past that are being foreclosed because of bureaucrats back in Washington who don't really understand our state like they should. Don, we'll call on you right now.
Thanks, Senator Hatch and everyone. I would just say that as a kid who grew up in Utah, I understand the value of education, and it's very important to everything that we do to get a very good public education. I also concur with these gentlemen 100%, having worked as an engineering consultant and then in the environment that is 10,000 times easier to solve challenges on a state or local level than it is the federal level. The federal government is a complete mess to try to get anything accomplished. And I would also just say that thank you to Senator Hatch and Congressman Hansen and Bishop. The state of Utah, as well as thanking the governor and the Utah legislature, we've invested almost $100 million to make our federal lands more productive. There's enough new forage out there to grow 250,000 more elk or deer or moose or cows. We only have one problem. The federal employees say it's not important to increase economic activity to rural Utah, to the guiding industry, to the hunting industry, to the recreation industry, to the livestock industry. So I think that this is a great opportunity. Utah has been a pioneer state. We have always led the way in the nation. I think that we can solve these problems, make our lands more productive. We can have energy. We can have wildlife conservation. And I think it is really important to know, though, that our public lands in state ownership will still be a great treasure to the entire United States, where people can come and enjoy some of the most beautiful places on earth. I have confidence in the Team Utah can do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Mike?
I'm Michael Swinson. I'm the executive director of a group called Utah Shared Access Alliance, and we work to protect access, responsible motorized access to the public lands here in Utah. This really is a kind of a dream come true for me personally and for our organization. I want to thank all the gentlemen up here and many folks who aren't here. There's been decades of blood, sweat, and tears to work on these issues. This map is incredibly compelling and illustrative of the problems we really face in the West. I want you to know that we cannot possibly control our future and our destiny. We are not truly sovereign if we can't control the lands within our state. House Bill 148 and House Joint Resolution 3 are really akin to a Declaration of Independence. A declaration of independence from federal tyranny, of control of public lands in the West that have really held folks in the West back. I'm so appreciative of the opportunity to do this. I want you to know, to all those who have said that the public lands in the West are so beautiful and so pristine and so wonderful that they must be preserved, they're absolutely right. They must be. We're so appreciative that people see the good care that those in the West have taken of the land. In Utah, we're no different. We have an awful lot of beautiful land, and not only will we be able to develop resources for the betterment of our citizens of our state, but we will be better able to protect the land. We will be better able to manage the land. You won't see the massive bark beetle kills that have devastated the forests in the state of Utah when it's under the control of the state. The failed Washington policies will no longer apply because the folks here in this state who have already proven that they are infinitely more capable of managing everything in this state than the federal government is, will do the same for the public lands and resources we have. This is a real opportunity to have a greater say in how lands are managed in the West. You don't have that opportunity in Washington, D.C. So no matter what side of the aisle you're on, no matter what your issue might be, you can greater petition your state government to do the things you want. So this should be bipartisan. This shouldn't matter where you land on the issue. Everyone should be supporting this. So we call upon the citizens of this state to support the legislature, our federal delegation, and we ask that other states join with us. This is a social revolution that is just at the beginning, and I think we're going to win this thing. So thank you very much.
If there are any questions, we'll be happy to have folks up here answer them.